Mr. Ambassador, you have been talking about a solution that will hold two states. But as I remember, there's only one Jerusalem, and you haven't gone into that problem at all. Will you please do that, sir?
If you paid attention, I didn't go into any of the core issues because we can speculate as much as possible, but this is no more than just speculations of an ambassador, like speculation of a professor or a so-called expert on the Middle East. But very briefly, the core issues which are indicated, there are, say, 4 core issues. Borders, Jerusalem, refugees. Palestinians said, let's include also water into all of that. We initially said the water is a different problem, but we agreed to include also water, okay? Let's take one by one. Borders. More or less, if you look carefully at the, say, diplomatic record of the last 7-10 years, the solution is there. It has been already negotiated in the previous incarnation. We came twice in the last 8 years to a clear understanding of the territorial dimension of the conflict. It was attempted in Camp David in July of 2000 in the presence of Arafat, Barak, and Clinton. It was again put in writing by Moratinos, who summarized in 2001 the positions of the party, the key of the negotiations at the end of the Barak government, at the end of Clinton administration, and almost at the end of Yasser Arafat administration. And basically, if you read the book of Shlomo Ben Ami, is there. It's the Palestinians would have received 98 to 99% of the territory with swap of land. The map is not going to be identical to the 67 ceasefire lines. It's going to include some swap of land, but this more or less was more or less agreed upon by no other than Mahmoud Abbas, who is currently the chief negotiator, president of the Palestinian Authority. So this is, in principle, a technical question. Israel, of course, will insist on retaining the settlement blocks as prescribed in the letter, exchange of letter between the President Bush and Sharon in 2004, in return for which the Palestinians are going to get territorial compensation. If you come to the question of refugee, I believe that the solution is emanating from the definition of if you look at the statement of Annapolis, which basically talks about the two-state solution. The state of Israel is the solution to the national problem of the Jews, and Palestine is the solution to the national problem of the Palestinians. The right of return of the Palestinians, yes, to Palestine, not to Israel. And this will be subject to their ability to absorb numbers and other arrangements. The international community is fully aware of the need to have 2 states, not to undermine 1 state in order to create another state, and is ready to jump and help with compensation and investments to resettle and some of the refugees who won't be able to come back to the state of Palestine. Israel will consider, under very severe, say, restrictions, because it wants to maintain its national identity, it will consider family reunification in humanitarian cases. And this is basically has been already discussed, and I believe President Sarkozy just mentioned a few months ago, and Bush led his foreign minister also repeated that the solution should be 2 nation states for the 2 peoples. When it comes to Jerusalem, well, I can point out there is a whole library of subjects how to deal with Jerusalem. I would put this way. My government right now, the Prime Minister actually, is under tremendous pressure from one coalition partner not to negotiate the issue of Jerusalem right now. Because this coalition partner says, you negotiate Jerusalem, we pull out of the coalition, we pull out from coalition, governmental crisis, new elections, and who knows who's going to end up as Prime Minister. And that is, we have to start it all over again. So Prime Minister, understanding that our plate is full with so many other difficult questions, he's not raising the question of Jerusalem right now. This coalition partner is not accepting at face value this kind of a promise, and it's currently some sort of, let's say, semi-crisis in Israel, because they are concerned that maybe there are some secret contacts in which the issue of Jerusalem has been discussed. Now, if you check the diplomatic record, Jerusalem came up very heavily in the Camp David II in 2004. And Shlomo Ben-Ami describes in great detail, how they, for example, were dealing with the disposition of the city. And Clinton, in his famous parameters, which were dictated, and Moratinos put them down in writing, coined the phrase Arab neighborhoods to the state of Palestine and Jewish neighborhoods to Israel. How you do it on the map, if you look at the map, it's difficult, but it's possible because, again, there is an obstacle, a physical obstacle, the security fence, which has been more or less erected in the last few years to stop infiltration of terrorists, and it goes more or less along these ethnic lines. Is this a revolutionary principle? No, it has been already attempted back in the 40s. In the partition plan, the borders of Israel, which were crazy borders given the compressed geography, but they were running for hundreds of kilometers because they were going by the principle of if you have a kind of a Jewish settlement, then the border will go like this, and then an Arab settlement will go like that. In other words, making this quite difficult to defend. But the principle, what is Jewish will stay Jewish, what is Arab is going to stay Arab, and then you can superimpose the two maps. I'm talking to you as an analyst right now, not as an ambassador, because this is not negotiated. But the map of Jerusalem is not of the Jewish Jerusalem is not identical with the map of the Arab Al-Quds. There are some places which are Al-Quds, but they're not Jerusalem, vice versa. The problem gets much more complicated when you come to this 1 square kilometer, which is called the Holy Basin, where by history, the three major monotheistic religions have a lot of, say, affinity to that. Where there is a Temple Mount, which the Arabs call Haram al-Sharif, and in Camp David they were going into a very, very interesting discussion in the presence of the American president, in which they were trying to divide sovereignty in terms of, vertically. And now on the top, the Arabs, because they have the mosques, on the bottom where the big stones of the temple are the Jews, and it was quite an interesting discussion. I shall tell you one story which is related to that. Yasser Arafat listened very carefully to this story, and then they were all sent back to their, say, rooms and asked to reflect on this. Clinton took the plane and went to the G7 meeting in Tokyo and told the guys, don't leave the place, stay here for 3 days and reflect on what we are discussing. I shall come back in 3 days and resume our discussion. So they were reflecting for 3 days, and after they reconvened, after Clinton came back from the G7 meeting in Tokyo, so what is the answer? And Yasser Arafat, Mr. President, I cannot accept this, if I'm going to accept this, you'll be coming to my funeral. This is not for me to discuss or to accept it. It is in the hands of the Muslim world. The moment you take the issue of Jerusalem, you place it in the hands of the Muslim world, you'll never have a resolution of the problem. And what is more interesting is after this Camp David talks collapsed, Yasser Arafat embarked on a tour of the world trying to seek, as usually, diplomatic support for that. And he was actually heavily criticized in 2 places where he did not expect this type of criticism. The first stop was in Paris, where Chirac told him, you blew it, Mr. Arafat, because you were there. This was the closest one got in the last 100 years of conflict to a 2-state solution. It was almost clinched. Okay, it's a matter of principle, of course, in implementation, but it was there. And he blew it, and he said, no, I can't accept this. And then he went to another place, where he also expected to be caressed and supported, and this is Indonesia. And the president of Indonesia, who was a very pious Muslim by the name of Wahib, told him, you blew it, mister. Because I'm telling you, this is what you're going to get, no more than that. This is the best you can get and aspire, and you reject it, then I don't know how long this conflict is going to go on. And Arafat said, no, I cannot make it. It's not for me to make this type of decision. Now, by the same token, one can basically transfer this type of discussion on the Israeli side, in which the Prime Minister, by the sheer inclination to discuss the problem of Jerusalem, might be heavily criticized by elements in his own society, which are going to say Jerusalem is not for you to decide. This is for the Jewish people to decide.